Hello everyone, Father Jared Cohen coming to you, pastor of St. Joseph Pillar Families here in Shelby County, Ohio, with part 2 in our series on the Beacons of Light process. And this part 2 is specifically on the process, so like kind of looking at overall, taking a very high level view of what happened and what we can expect in the future. So process, like where did this all begin? Well, it's been happening really for decades. So even back in the early 2000s, it might have been in the late 90s, can't remember exactly whenever all the work went into, there was something called the Futures Project. And the Futures Project was supposed to be like a proto-beacon. So it's supposed to restructure parishes, and there's supposed to be this whole process of combining resources and taking a look at what would be the best way to ultimately pastorally serve the people of the Archdiocese as they expected the number of priests to plummet by more than it has actually. So that plan was never fully acted upon. So there was no enforcement, no real teeth to it. It happened in a few places, but ultimately it was never fully enacted, and on very, very, very small portion and small pockets did it happen throughout the Archdiocese. So this has been on the Archdiocese's minds for a long time. Fast forward, like we began to see in the 2010s, an increase in the number of, two things really. So like in relation to priests. So we saw a number of priests that were serving multiple parishes begin to increase, but then we also saw the relative experience of those priests as they became pastors also decline by a significant amount in the 2010s. And so in 2018, the Archdiocese kind of realized that, okay, this is happening. It seems like it may be causing some issues from what we've heard from priests and people alike. And so they called together all the pastors with multiple parishes in the Archdiocese. So they all came together, young, more seasoned, all of them came together. And from what I've heard, I was not part of that meeting because I was just a vicar at that point, but my pastor at the time came back from that meeting and he commented that he's never seen the presbyter, the priest of the Archdiocese so united in the fact that this wasn't working, that this wasn't the best way to go about it. And so this began kind of the process of, okay, how do we address that issue, right? How do we address the issue of basically priests being pastors of multiple parishes? And so the whole process of beginning to think about how it works, what we're going to do about that, then began. And as a result of that, there was a number of different committees, groups that came together, made up of priests and laity alike, that began to have discussions on what this would be. And then eventually the Archdiocese hired a consulting firm, called Partners Edge. So some people will say that Catholic Leadership Institute is one that instituted, but it's actually the ones that came up with the modeling for the Archdiocese was Partners Edge. And so Partners Edge was a consulting firm, and some people have like, why is a consulting firm getting involved in this process? They don't know what our needs of our Archdiocese are, and makes sense to an extent, but also at the same time, when we're looking at this process, we need an impartial judge, right? So we need somebody who is coming into this with outside the situation. I mean, we would consider this to be the best way to do court cases. So if a judge has a conflict of interest, that judge is an excuse from their particular role in that case. Same thing with jurors. So jurors need to be objective. So we see this in the legal system all the time, and we even see it like in the FIFA World Cup. You'll never see, like if a team from Europe and a team from North America are playing, you're not going to see refs from North America or Europe involved being the ones who are reffing that match. Instead, you're almost always going to see them be from Africa or Asia or South America, be the ones that are reffing those particular matches. So, we see this idea of objectivity in so many other aspects of our life, and so it should be with this process, right? That we can't just simply choose for ourselves, because nobody wants to give up anything, or nobody wants to make themselves suffer in this way. And so one of the more effective ways to do this is to get a consulting firm to take it on. And so that's why we invited in a consulting firm. Partners Edge took that on, and then they began the modeling. And so this went through this whole process, and they did consult with people from across the Archdiocese, priests from across the Archdiocese, of how this is going to work. And and then the model became, okay, we're going to combine these parishes into family of parishes, which then will become one canonical parish over a period of a 5-year process. It may take less time than that. It may take all 5 years. Depends on the situation. And so that's what they decide on. It's presented to priest and principals, and then a few days later it's made public on a beacon's website. I forget if it was part of the Archdiocese website or if it was its own standalone thing. Either way, it went public. People from across the Archdiocese had the opportunity to comment on that current model, the original model of family and parishes, to give their suggestions, their thoughts, and then there actually resulted in a number of changes being made, including to St. Joseph Pillar Families, NW7 initially, as it was named, then ultimately it resulted in the addition of Sacred Heart of Jesus and Cardioville being added to our family of parishes from the initial modeling of just being Holy Angels, St. Michael, and Saints Peter and Paul in Newport. So we can see in that example there that they did take that consultation into account. They did take the opinions of the laity into account for that. Now, fast forward, we get through all this, and then there's a lot of conversations, and I understand it happened differently at each family, so I can just speak simply for the way that it happened at ours. I then began to meet with the 4 priests. That would be 4 priests together, so myself and my vicars just discussing, trying to get to know them a little bit better in a dinner and some other meetings, and then we also included another priest who was pastor but was going to be moving to a different assignment. So there was 5 of us meeting to begin discussing Mass schedule and how certain things were going to work, and then presented it to all the pastoral councils to talk about how priest rotation, all those different things are going to work. And so we had those conversations, and from the very get-go, I also had, we also had discussions with the pastoral councils and the finance committees to do like a walkthrough. So we walked through all the campuses, so that way people in the pastoral councils and on finance committees were familiar with what was the situation in terms of building structures, church structures, all that kind of stuff, what the grounds look like at each parish. So we did that before we even began in July. And I kind of made it clear from that point that the goal would eventually be to move to one office. And so we began, so that was all made clear there. And then we began meeting with the but with all the pastoral councils in the family quarterly initially, and then eventually they suggested we go up to a month, so we did that, and we had some delays in there, so it was more like 2 out of every 3 months we would meet together with all the pastoral councils of our family parishes meeting together. And then when we did the office move, we had a town halls for that, we had all kinds of different things in relation to that. And then also throughout the past year and a half, I've sat down and had numerous meetings with people, along with other priests having sat down with people in relation to beacons, and even some employees having sat down with groups, individuals. I can't count the number. It would be over 50 individual meetings I've had. Emails, letters, like a lot of that stuff, and a lot of those have been responded to. Not all of them, I'm sure, because we get a lot of that stuff, not even just about beacons, just a lot of emails and other stuff that has to be taken care of. And so I'm sure I didn't respond to every single one. But my point being is that there has been a lot of consultation. There has been my best attempt to listen. But just because myself or another priest doesn't, do exactly what was asked of us, or to stop this process altogether, or go back and say, actually, you know what, it's not a good idea more, it doesn't mean that hasn't been listened to. It simply means that we have listened, but then also we understand that in the long run, this is going to be the best thing for our parishes and the Catholics in the Archdiocese, is to do this, because it's going to, I listed the whys in the last video, so I won't necessarily cover those again, but again, it's going to make administration of parishes more effective. It's going to allow us to be a little more dynamic in how we move parishes together, because as a priest, to think with 4 different brains from the different perspective of each parish, that's like a really hard thing to do. However, as one of my friends in business kind of recently noted, he noted that, tell me to take over 7 companies with 7 different locations, and I'll tell you you're nuts. However, tell me to take over 1 company that has 7 locations, and I'll say, that's definitely doable, right? So it makes sense from just that administrative point of view, but also spiritually, this allows us to see ourselves as part of a bigger body of Christ, as part of the universal church, to develop that identity as Catholics, as members of the entire body of Christ throughout the entire world, throughout the Archdiocese. So all those things there, right? And so that's like been the process up to this point. That will continue. Do our best to continue have those meetings. We'll continue to try to respond to letters as best we can, and all those things, right? And then as we began the Unified Family Pastoral Council in January, now to be very clear, now just to take notes, so to make this kind of clear here, I will not be submitting a petition to the Archbishop before January of 2026. Okay, so this will not happen. I will not submit a petition for the amalgamation or merger of parishes until 2026. And so at the earliest. So I'm not even saying I'll do it in 2026. I'm just saying it will not happen before that. So with that, then just to contextualize everything that I say now. But we will probably have discussions with Pastoral Council before that particular date. And then we will also work to ultimately ensure that we try to talk about that, work through that with also finance committees as well. So we're going to try to ensure that as we have those discussions, that also finance committee will be brought into that. We'll discuss all those details. And so there will be a number of conversations leading up to that point. So please note that if you hear it's being discussed at Pastoral Council, that doesn't mean that it's happening imminently. That just means that we're beginning to have those discussions on what the practicalities of that means. And then before, again, I submit the petition, most definitely we will have town halls in relation to that. There'll be a number of explanations and kind of further information given on that. So there will be a lot in the lead up before I even consider submitting a particular petition. So to the Archbishop for the amalgamation or merger of parishes. And then, then basically after I submit a petition, then it has to go through a whole process of being, the Archbishop has to approve it after a consultation with the Presbyteral Council, and after ultimately he brings it to Pastoral Council and then submits a decree. Then after the decree is submitted, if people still feel that they want to challenge it, they have 10 business days. So what that means is, let's say the decree is presented on a Friday evening or whenever it is, so that would not count as a useful day because it's not a business day, right? So it wouldn't begin until Monday. So those 10 useful days wouldn't begin until Monday, and it would only go through Friday, and then it would be the next week. So really 10 useful days is effectively, in some cases, 2.5 weeks, sometimes just 2 weeks, depends on when it's presented to the particular parishes affected by it. So can have that then. If there's no reply made by the bishop within 30 days, the assumed response is that he replies in the negative, that is, that he upholds the decree. And then from there, one can challenge to Rome. I have not found a whole lot of clear information on exactly what the length of time is that one can submit to Rome. In my research, it seems like it ranges from anywhere 30 to 60 days. I don't know which one that is, but 30 to 60 days to then appeal to Rome. And then from there, if there's no response from Rome, again, it's assumed as the initial one with the bishop. It's assumed as a negative response that it's upheld. So that's the way that it works there. So everybody's kind of clear. Again, I'm not real sure on the length of time one has to appeal to Rome. I think that must depend case by case. I'm not real sure. So it's not totally clear from what I've read. Some people make very definitive statements, but very different statements about what that length of time is. So so I'm not real sure in my research of which one that is. So that's what happens leading up to that, and then the decree will say on which day that it takes effect, and then there will be a whole lot of details and lead up to that as well. And again, those are a lot of details about how all that comes together that will be covered in the next video, where I'll kind of detail, well, what does this all mean, and how does it affect parishes, how does it affect church buildings and all that jazz, finances, and all the fun stuff that everybody loves to talk about, right? So I hope that gives a little bit of an explanation of, again, the process of how we got here, but then also the aspect of where we're going from here. So with that, I hope each and every one of you has a wonderful day, and know my prayers for you. God bless.